I always thought that my wedding day would be the moment when all the ghosts of my past would finally fade into silence, replaced by the warmth of love and the promise of a future I had so longed for. The church was filled with soft golden light pouring through stained glass windows, painting the pews with colors that shimmered like blessings from heaven. My dress flowed around me like a cloud, delicate lace brushing against my skin, each thread carrying a prayer of hope. Ethan stood at the altar, his eyes fixed on me, love etched so clearly in his gaze that my heart trembled. The whispers of guests, the scent of roses filling the air, the gentle echo of the organ, all seemed like a dream I never wanted to wake from. I was ready to say my vows, to finally speak words that would tie me forever to the man who made me believe I was worthy of love. But just as I inhaled, preparing to answer the priest's words, the heavy church doors slammed open with a bang that froze every smile in the room. The sound echoed through the sacred space like a thunderclap, cutting through the calm like a blade. Every head turned, and gasps rippled across the pews. My chest tightened as I saw her standing there, poised as if the moment belonged to her. Victoria, my stepmother, dressed in a long, flowing white gown that nearly mirrored my own. For a heartbeat, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, that stress had conjured a nightmare in the middle of my perfect day. But no, it was her, every step deliberate, her chin raised in defiance, her lips curling into a faint, mocking smile. She carried herself with a confidence that made my stomach twist, as if she had rehearsed this entrance. The murmurs grew louder, whispers of scandal blooming like fire through the guests. My heart raced, not only with anger, but with the familiar fear she had planted in me years ago. The audacity of her presence struck me like a physical blow. How dare she? This was my wedding, my one sacred day, and she had chosen to invade it wearing the one color no woman but the bride should dare to wear. My fingers clenched around the bouquet, the stems digging into my skin, until I thought they might snap. I felt Ethan's eyes burning into me with worry, his hand brushing mine gently, grounding me in that chaos. But in that moment, every wound she had inflicted on me over the years opened again, raw and bleeding. I was no longer just Natalie, the bride. I was the little girl whose laughter she had silenced, whose confidence she had shattered, whose dreams she had trampled with icy disdain. And now she stood there, uninvited, determined to strip from me the happiness I had fought so desperately to build. My father, Richard, sat stiffly in the front pew, his face paling as his wife approached the aisle with her gown shimmering under the stained glass. His eyes darted nervously between me and Victoria, but he made no move, no sound, no protest. That silence was all too familiar, the silence that had defined my childhood, the silence that had allowed Victoria's cruelty to seep into every corner of my life. I wanted to scream at him, to beg him to finally choose me, just once, over her. But instead, my throat closed, choked by the humiliation that weighed on me as my guests watched this theater unfold. I could hear them whispering, some sympathetic, others scandalized, all of them witnesses to my stepmother's performance. Victoria's heels clicked against the polished floor as she moved further inside, and each step felt like an intrusion into my very soul. Her eyes found mine, cold and sharp, and I could read the message behind them. This is my stage, not yours. The smirk at the corner of her mouth told me she relished my pain, that this entire charade was crafted to remind me that she still had the power to ruin me. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Her presence was like a storm I had no choice but to face. My fingers trembled around the bouquet as a sick realization settled in. She wasn't here just to disrupt. She was here to claim my day, to claim my worth, to overshadow me as she always had. Ethan's hand squeezed mine, strong and steady, his whisper brushing against my ear. "Look at me, Natalie. Don't let her take this from you." His words were a lifeline, pulling me back from the brink of despair. I glanced at him, his eyes full of unwavering devotion, and for a moment, the chaos around me blurred into silence. But as quickly as that comfort settled, the sound of guests shifting in their seats pulled me back into the storm. My humiliation was now public, displayed in front of everyone who mattered to me. The people I had invited to witness the best day of my life were watching my stepmother turn it into a spectacle, one she had likely been planning for weeks. Elena, my maid of honor and closest friend, half rose from her seat, her fists clenched at her sides. Her protective instincts flashed in her eyes as if she would storm down the aisle and drag Victoria out herself. But I shook my head ever so slightly, holding her back with nothing more than a glance. I knew if I allowed anger to explode now, Victoria would win. She thrived on chaos, fed on humiliation. My silence was my only weapon, though it burned me to use it. Still, my body shook with the effort of holding myself together as she continued her march of arrogance. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, the church fell eerily silent. Father Gabriel, the priest who had guided Ethan and me through premarital counseling, straightened at the altar. His eyes, calm but piercing, fixed firmly on Victoria. He didn't flinch, didn't waver, though the entire church seemed to hold its breath. For the first time since she had entered, I saw Victoria hesitate, if only for the briefest second. It was as if she hadn't expected to be challenged in this sacred place, in front of so many witnesses. Father Gabriel's hands tightened around the Book of Vows, and his voice rose, deep and steady, carrying through every corner of the church. "This is not your wedding." The words echoed through the space, heavy as thunder, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. The guests gasped again, but this time the sound carried something different. Relief, maybe, or anticipation. Victoria's smirk faltered, her composure cracking like a mask under pressure. And me? My heart pounded so violently I thought it might break through my chest. For the first time that day, I felt the stirrings of something unexpected. Hope. The words, "This is not your wedding," hung in the air like a verdict, slicing through the silence of the church. Victoria's eyes narrowed, her mask of composure slipping into something darker. Anger, humiliation, maybe even fear. She had never been challenged publicly, not by me, not by anyone. For years, she thrived because people tiptoed around her poison, afraid to confront the venom she spewed. Now, here she was, on sacred ground, stripped of her performance by a priest who saw straight through her. A wave of murmurs rippled through the pews, guests exchanging looks, whispering accusations, sympathy, even judgment. My cheeks burned with shame and fury all at once. I wanted to hide, but at the same time, I wanted to stand taller than I ever had before. Her voice finally broke the silence, smooth yet trembling beneath the surface. "I'm here to support my family," she declared, her tone dripping with false innocence. Is it such a crime to want to be part of such a momentous day? The audacity of her words struck me like a slap. Family. She dared to use that word after years of treating me as an intruder, a nuisance, a burden that she was forced to tolerate. I wanted to scream at her that she had forfeited that right the day she told me I was nothing more than the shadow of my mother, a girl unworthy of love. Yet, my voice failed me, swallowed by the knot tightening in my throat. It was Ethan's hand at my back, steady and warm, that stopped me from crumbling in front of everyone. I looked at my father then, hoping, praying he would rise and finally, for once in my life, stand on my side. His lips parted, but no words came. His hands trembled in his lap, and his gaze darted downward, unable to meet mine. The familiar ache spread through my chest, the reminder of years spent waiting for him to choose me, to defend me, to love me louder than his fear of losing her. That silence was the cruelest answer of all. Victoria knew it too. Her smirk returned as if my father's silence confirmed her power. She had always used his weakness as her weapon, and today, in front of my entire world, she was sharpening it again. My nails dug into the bouquet until petals snapped and fell silently to the ground. Ethan took a small step forward, his jaw tight, his voice sharp with controlled fury. "You've made your point, Victoria. This is Natalie's day, not yours. Respect that, or leave." His words echoed like a shield around me, filling the cracks that my father's silence had left. The guests stirred again, this time leaning toward Ethan, their expressions softening with admiration for his bravery. It was everything I had ever wanted, someone willing to fight for me when my own father never had. Victoria, however, only tilted her head and let out a soft laugh, cold and hollow, as if she found his defiance amusing rather than threatening. My skin prickled. This wasn't just a disruption. This was a calculated attack, designed to expose every wound I had buried deep. Memories surged like a flood, pulling me backward through years I had tried to forget. I remembered the first birthday after my mother died, when I was 12. Victoria had insisted on hosting it, only to humiliate me by making a speech about how Natalie should be grateful she even has a roof over her head. I remembered the day I brought home my first college acceptance letter, and instead of celebrating, she mocked my choice, telling me no one cared about the future of a girl with no discipline. Each memory slammed into me with cruel clarity, a reminder that this moment was not an accident. It was the culmination of every battle she had waged against me. She wanted me broken on my wedding day because she couldn't stand to see me whole. My chest rose and fell with ragged breaths as Father Gabriel raised a hand, his voice calm but firm, cutting through her theatrics. "Victoria, this ceremony is sacred. It belongs to Natalie and Ethan. If you wish to offer blessings, do so with humility. But if you come to sow discord, then I must ask you to leave." His words were not a request. They were a command cloaked in grace. Victoria's eyes flickered with something sharp, almost panicked, though she quickly masked it. I saw her glance around the room, scanning the faces of the guests, searching for allies, but the stares she received were not warm. They were cold, disapproving, even disgusted. For the first time in years, I realized the power had shifted. She wasn't in control anymore. Not here, not today. A trembling sigh escaped me as I felt Ethan's arm slip around my shoulders, shielding me from her gaze. His lips brushed against my temple, whispering, "She can't take this from us, Natalie. Not unless we let her." The strength in his voice anchored me, gave me the courage to lift my head and finally look at her without fear. My heart still pounded. My palms still shook, but I refused to let her see the girl she had always crushed. Instead, I let her see the woman I had become, the bride who would not allow her light to be stolen. For the first time that day, I straightened my spine and faced her with a defiance she hadn't anticipated. The church waited in silence, all eyes on us, breaths held as though the walls themselves were listening. Victoria's lips curved into a tight smile, but I caught the flicker of rage in her eyes, the frustration that her plan was unraveling before her. She turned her attention back to Father Gabriel, her voice sickly sweet. "I only wanted to be here for my husband's daughter. Is that such a terrible thing?" My father shifted uncomfortably, his silence screaming louder than any words. But inside me, something shifted too. For the first time, I realized I was no longer begging for his defense. I didn't need it anymore. This was my wedding, my life, and I would not let her rewrite it. And as that truth settled in, I saw the first crack form in her carefully constructed mask. The priest's words had quieted the storm for a moment, but the real tempest raged inside me. My father's silence, heavier than any insult Victoria could throw, suffocated me. I turned to him, desperate for even a flicker of support, a single glance that said, "I'm with you, daughter." But his eyes never rose to meet mine. He sat frozen, his shoulders hunched, his hands clamped tightly in his lap. He looked like a man chained, unable to move, unable to choose. And in that stillness, in that cowardice, I saw the truth I had spent years avoiding. My father would never stand for me, because standing for me meant standing against her. The wound was old, but today, in front of everyone, it tore open anew. Victoria noticed it too. She always did. Her smile widened, triumphant, as though his silence was her victory banner. I could almost hear her unspoken words. "See? Even your own father doesn't believe in you." It was a cruelty sharper than any blade, a cruelty she had perfected. I had learned long ago that her power didn't always come from what she said, but from what she didn't need to say. She thrived on the voids, the absences, the silences that hurt more than shouts ever could. And today, she wielded my father's silence like a dagger, plunging it deep into my chest while everyone watched. My knees trembled, but Ethan's hand remained firm at my side, grounding me, reminding me that I wasn't alone anymore. The guests began to shift in their seats, their discomfort palpable. Whispers snaked through the air, subtle yet relentless. Some glanced at me with pity, others at Victoria with disdain. A few even turned to my father, shaking their heads, as though silently demanding that he wake from his stupor and do the right thing. But he remained unmoving, a ghost of a man who had long ago chosen the path of least resistance. My vision blurred as tears welled, not from weakness, but from anger, from years of waiting for something that would never come. I wanted to scream at him, to demand he finally choose me, but the words lodged like stones in my throat. Ethan must have sensed the storm inside me, because he gently squeezed my hand and whispered, "Natalie, look at me." When I did, I saw a steadiness in his eyes that cut through the chaos. "You don't need her, and you don't need him either. You've built yourself from ashes before. You can stand now." His words reminded me of every night I cried alone. Every morning I forced myself to get up despite Victoria's cruelty. Every victory I earned without a father's applause. I realized then that Ethan wasn't just my partner. He was my proof that love could exist without conditions, without manipulation. That realization wrapped around me like armor, giving me the strength to stand tall, even as my father sat small. Victoria, however, wasn't done. She tilted her head, her eyes gleaming like a predator circling prey. "Natalie, darling," she said loudly, her voice echoing in the hushed church, "don't you want your family to be part of your joy? Or are you so insecure you can't even handle my presence here?" Her words were sharp, designed to twist perception, to make me look petty, fragile, ungrateful. I saw a few guests frown, unsure, caught in the web she wove so easily. Rage bubbled in my chest. How many times had she painted me as unstable, oversensitive, dramatic? How many times had people believed her because she knew how to play the perfect victim, the perfect saint? But today, I couldn't let her win that narrative. I stepped forward, my voice trembling but loud enough for all to hear. "This is not about insecurity, Victoria. This is about respect, something you've never shown me." Gasps rippled through the crowd, not from the content of my words, but from the fact that I had finally spoken them aloud, without fear. My heart pounded, my hands shook, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. "You've mocked me, belittled me, and tried to erase me from my father's life for years. But today, you don't get to erase me from my own wedding." The silence that followed was deafening, as though the walls themselves had absorbed my fury. For the first time, it was her turn to falter, her smile twitching at the edges, struggling to hold its shape. My father shifted slightly then, as though my words had finally penetrated the fog he lived in. His mouth opened, a whisper of sound escaping, but nothing coherent came. He looked torn, his eyes flicking between me and her, the eternal war he had never chosen to fight now exposed in front of dozens of witnesses. The weight of his indecision pressed down on the room, thick and suffocating. And yet, as much as it hurt, I realized his silence no longer defined me. For years, I let it shape who I believed I was. Unworthy, unwanted, unloved. But standing there in my wedding dress, beside a man who loved me fully, I realized that silence was his failure, not mine. That truth burned hot in my chest, both liberating and devastating. Victoria's lips curved into a cruel smile as she leaned closer, her whisper venomous, meant only for me, but sharp enough to slice through my skin. "You can dress yourself in lace and roses, Natalie, but you'll always be the little girl no one wanted." Her words were fire, scorching the fragile calm I had built. But before I could respond, before I could even breathe, Father Gabriel's voice boomed once more, his calm stripped away, replaced by something fierce and unyielding. "Enough, Victoria. This house of God will not be your stage. If you cannot honor this union, then you must leave, now." His words were final, a hammer striking stone, and for the first time, I saw real fear flicker in her eyes. The silence after Father Gabriel's command was unbearable. Every guest seemed frozen, trapped between shock and curiosity, their eyes darting from Victoria's defiant face to my trembling hands. I felt like a glass about to shatter, thin and fragile under the weight of years of resentment and humiliation. Victoria's chest rose and fell rapidly, her painted lips parting as though she wanted to lash back at the priest, but no words came. For the first time, I saw hesitation in her, the briefest flicker of doubt, and in that moment, I realized she wasn't invincible. She was flesh and bone like the rest of us, fueled by manipulation, but not immune to consequences. My heart pounded harder, knowing the balance was shifting, yet terrified of what she might do next. Ethan stepped closer, his hand never leaving mine, as if sensing the danger wasn't over. His eyes were sharp, protective, his jaw clenched so tight I could almost hear the grind of his teeth. "We don't owe her this stage, Natalie," he whispered softly. "Just for me," though his gaze never left Victoria. Those words reminded me of something I had buried, the countless birthdays she had ruined, the graduations she turned into battles, the dinners that ended with me running to my room in tears, while my father begged me to let it go. But here, at my wedding, there would be no letting go, not this time. My voice, once chained, now pulsed with defiance. For the first time, I wanted the entire world to see what she truly was. Victoria's eyes narrowed as though reading my thoughts. She straightened her spine, gathering back her composure, and spoke with that silken venom she had mastered for years. "Natalie," she said, feigning sweetness that made my stomach churn, "you're humiliating yourself. This is your wedding day, yet here you are, screaming like a child. Guests will remember this. not your vows." Her manipulation was seamless, weaving shame into her every syllable, as though I were to blame for the chaos she had brought. I saw heads turn, some guests biting their lips, unsure whom to believe. She thrived in that gray space, where doubt could stain perception, but I had spent years drowning in that poison, and today, I refused to drink another drop. I drew a deep breath, the lace of my gown constricting my ribs, and let my voice carry across the church. "If there's humiliation here, Victoria, it's not mine. It's yours, for storming into a sacred ceremony and trying to steal it." Gasps echoed again, louder this time, but I didn't stop. "You wore white to make this about you. You spoke to make me feel small, and you've spent years convincing my father that I'm unworthy of love." My words cracked, but they were loud, steady enough to slice through her facade. For the first time, her mask slipped, and a flash of rage flared in her eyes. It was quick, but I caught it, and I knew others did too. The whispers now carried a different tone, doubt directed at her, not me. My father stirred, shifting uncomfortably in his seat, as if my words had unchained something buried deep within him. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time in what felt like years. His lips quivered, his eyes glistening with the weight of truths he had refused to face. Yet before he could speak, Victoria's hand shot out, gripping his arm with a force that made me flinch. "Don't!" she hissed under her breath, though the microphone picked up just enough for the front rows to hear. The control she held over him was visible, tangible. He sank back into his chair, his courage deflated, and the audience saw it all. A murmur of disapproval rippled through the church, and for the first time, the shame she tried to pin on me shifted back onto her. Ethan's voice cut through the air then, calm but edged with steel. "Natalie, you don't need to fight her anymore. Everyone can see the truth now." His words settled into my chest like a balm, steadying my trembling heart, and he was right. This wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about reclaiming the day that was mine, the love that was mine, the life I was about to begin. I lifted my chin, my tears drying as a new strength replaced them. "This is my wedding," I said firmly, facing both Victoria and my father, "and nothing you do will take it away from me." The conviction in my tone surprised even me, but it filled the room with something undeniable. For once, the power belonged to me. Victoria laughed then, a sharp, brittle sound that echoed cruelly through the sanctuary. "Oh, how dramatic," she sneered, but the laughter lacked its usual confidence. "You think one speech changes anything? You'll always be beneath me, Natalie. No husband, no priest, no vows will ever change that." She wanted to cling to control, to reassert her dominance, but I saw it, the slight quiver in her hands, the way her voice wavered for a fraction of a second. The cracks in her armor were spreading, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. Guests began to shake their heads, mothers pulled their children closer, and my aunt in the second row even whispered audibly, "Shame on her." Those 3 words sliced deeper than my own speeches ever could. Father Gabriel stepped forward again, his presence towering not through physicality, but through the authority of truth. "This union is blessed by love, not cursed by bitterness," he declared, his voice commanding silence once more. "If you cannot rejoice with this couple, then you have no place here. Victoria, leave this church, or face the shame of being remembered not as a stepmother, but as a destroyer." The weight of his words hung heavy, final. Victoria's face twisted, torn between pride and the sting of public rejection. For once, she had no clever response, no rehearsed cruelty, and as she faltered, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and sorrow. Triumph, because she was finally being unmasked. Sorrow, because my father's silence meant he would leave with her, chained still by the life he chose. When Victoria finally stepped back, her heels clicking defiantly against the marble floor, I felt the entire church release a breath it had been holding, yet her presence lingered like smoke after a fire, heavy and suffocating. I watched her retreat to the pews, refusing to leave despite Father Gabriel's ultimatum, her chin high as if daring anyone to drag her out. My father trailed behind her, head bowed, his hands shaking as though torn in two. I wanted him to look at me, to choose me for once, but his eyes never lifted. The sting of his silence burned worse than any of Victoria's words, a wound that bled beneath the satin of my dress. For a moment, the joy of the day seemed shattered beyond repair. The priest's voice pulled me back, gentle yet steady. "Natalie, Ethan, love is tested in many ways, and today is but another trial. His gaze swept across the congregation, daring anyone to object further. Do not let envy steal what God has blessed. His words struck me, not just as comfort, but as a warning. For years, envy had been the root of Victoria's every act. The way she inserted herself into my father's life, the way she resented my bond with him, the way she could not stand to see me loved. Perhaps this wedding was never about stopping me, but about proving she could still overshadow me. That realization sent a chill down my spine, reminding me she would not leave quietly. Her silence now was not surrender, it was strategy. Ethan squeezed my hand again, grounding me in the storm. "Look at me," he whispered, his voice steady, but eyes burning with resolve. "This is our day. Don't give her the power to take it away." I turned to him, his face glowing under the stained glass light, and I felt the truth in his words. For years I had defined myself against Victoria's cruelty, but in this moment, I needed to define myself by love, by choice, by the life we were about to build. My heart softened, tears brimming, not from pain, but from the sheer weight of gratitude. Here stood a man who had seen my scars and loved me anyway, and with him, I could finally leave the shadow of the past behind, or so I thought, but the shadows clung tighter than I imagined. As the priest prepared to resume the vows, a voice rang out, not Victoria's, but my cousin Claire's. "Wait," she cried, standing abruptly, her face pale. "Natalie deserves to know the truth before she says, 'I do.'" The entire congregation turned to her, whispers erupting, the air electric with confusion. My stomach lurched, and I felt the blood drain from my face. Claire was one of the few family members who had supported me through Victoria's torment, the one who had told me I was not crazy for seeing through her lies. Why would she interrupt now, at this moment? Fear coiled in my chest, and for the first time that day, I wished desperately to run. Claire's voice trembled, but carried conviction. "Victoria isn't here by accident. She came because she knows something you don't." My heart thundered in my ears, my grip on Ethan's hand tightening painfully. "Your father," she hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. "He kept something from you, something Victoria has used against him all these years." My knees buckled, and Ethan caught me as the room seemed to spin. The betrayal I feared from Victoria was expected, but from my own blood, from my father, it was unbearable. Guests leaned forward, hanging on to every word, the tension so thick I could almost taste it, and I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the rest, yet I couldn't stop myself from listening. Victoria smirked from her pew, her arms folded across her chest as though she had orchestrated this moment all along. "Go ahead, Claire," she drawled, her voice laced with venom. "Tell her. She deserves to know why her father never truly stood up for her. Tell her what you discovered." My father's face turned ashen, his lips parting but no sound escaping. He looked trapped, cornered between two women, the weight of secrets pressing down like a crushing stone. My heart ached at the sight of him, broken, fragile, and yet complicit. Whatever Claire was about to reveal, it was clear he had known all along. And suddenly, every moment of silence, every time he let Victoria's cruelty pass unchecked, took on a new and horrifying meaning. The room grew unbearably quiet, every eye fixed on Claire. She looked at me with trembling compassion, as though wishing she didn't have to say it but knowing she must. "Natalie," she whispered, "Victoria has leverage because she knows your father had an affair years ago. And not just any affair. It was with her best friend. She's held it over him ever since." The words struck like lightning, splitting the ground beneath me. My breath caught in my throat, my mind struggling to process. My father, the man I once adored, the man I clung to in my mother's absence, he had betrayed us, and his silence wasn't weakness. It was guilt. Guilt that had chained him to Victoria and allowed her to poison my life. Gasps erupted around me, waves of shock pulsing through the congregation. Ethan's hand was still firm in mine, but I could feel his grip falter, as if even he was reeling from the revelation. My father buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking, and I realized the collapse I had hoped for in Victoria was happening to him instead. The shame was his, and yet the pain was mine to bear. Years of longing for his love, of begging for his defense, suddenly made sense. He hadn't failed me by accident. He had chosen silence, chosen Victoria, chosen the weight of his secret over his own daughter. And in that realization, I felt something inside me harden. A wall I hadn't known existed now stood tall, protecting me from further betrayal. Victoria rose from her seat then, triumphant, her voice carrying like a dagger through the church. "So you see, Natalie, your father has always been weak, always in my hands. And no matter how many vows you speak, no matter how much you think you've escaped me, you never will, because family is chains, and I hold the key." Her words dripped with satisfaction. The crowd stunned into silence once again. But this time, something within me shifted. I looked at Ethan, at the priest, at every witness to this chaos, and I realized Victoria was wrong. Family may be chains, but love was fire, and I was ready to burn through every shackle she had placed upon me. The silence in the church after Victoria's proclamation felt heavier than any words spoken. My chest rose and fell rapidly, as though the air itself resisted entering my lungs. I looked at my father, slumped in the front pew, his face buried in his trembling hands. It was as if the truth had aged him 20 years in an instant. The man I once idolized, the man whose absence had left me hollow, now sat exposed in his shame, unable to meet my eyes. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to claw back the years of confusion and pain. But the only sound I could manage was a strangled whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" It was less a question and more a broken plea, the voice of a daughter who had begged for honesty and never received it. His head lifted slowly, his eyes red-rimmed and glistening, but still he said nothing. And then, before he could speak, Victoria stepped forward again, reveling in the devastation she had unleashed. "He didn't tell you because he couldn't," she sneered, her heels echoing on the church floor like a gavel striking judgment. "Because every time he tried, I reminded him what it would cost. His reputation, his family, his career. Everything he built would have crumbled." She turned her venomous gaze toward me, her smile curved like a blade. "And so he kept silent. He chose me, Natalie. Not you. Never you." The words slammed into me like iron bars closing shut. It was not just betrayal. It was abandonment, deliberate and complete. Ethan's hand tightened on mine, his presence the only anchor keeping me from collapsing. "Don't listen to her," he murmured fiercely, but I shook my head. Victoria's words couldn't simply be dismissed, not when my father's silence confirmed them. My knees felt weak beneath the weight of reality. Every unanswered cry for help, every night I lay awake wondering why he didn't defend me, every cruel smirk from Victoria, it was all part of a choice. He had made his bed with her lies, and he had left me to rot in their shadow. Tears blurred my vision, streaking down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of sorrow anymore. They were fire. They were rage. And Victoria, sensing it, seemed to drink it in, twisting her knife deeper into the wound she had reopened. Father Gabriel raised his hand then, his voice steady but edged with authority. "Enough, Victoria. This is not your stage, and this is not your confession to give." His words rang out like a command, but Victoria only tilted her head, her smirk deepening as though amused by his defiance. "You think you can silence me, Father? The truth doesn't vanish because you say so. It festers. It eats away until it consumes everything. And Natalie," she turned back to me, her tone softening into a mockery of sympathy. "You've been living with rot your whole life. Your father gave it to you, and now I've exposed it." A collective murmur rippled through the guests, torn between horror and fascination, their whispers like knives scraping against my ears. Finally, my father stood, his shoulders stooped, but his voice breaking free at last. "Natalie," he began, his tone fractured, "I wanted to protect you. I thought if you never knew, you could still hold on to some illusion of me. I thought I was sparing you." He stumbled over his words, his gaze desperate, pleading. "But she's right. I failed you. I failed your mother. And every day I stayed with Victoria, I convinced myself it was for stability, for security. But really it was cowardice. I was afraid of losing everything." His confession spilled out like poisoned water, and for a moment I pitied him. But pity was quickly drowned by fury. "You didn't spare me," I hissed, my voice trembling. "You abandoned me, and you let her destroy me." Ethan pulled me closer, his arm protective around my trembling body, but I felt a cold detachment rising inside me. My father's words only confirmed what I had always feared, that I was never his priority. And Victoria, standing beside him now, looked victorious, her smile spreading as if she had won the final battle. But her triumph was cut short when Claire, my cousin, stepped forward again, her eyes blazing with anger. "You think you've told the worst of it, Victoria?" she challenged, her voice cutting through the air. "You haven't. Because there's something even you didn't plan for. Something you thought you buried with your lies. The shift in the room was instant. Shock gave way to curiosity, and all eyes darted back to Claire. Even Victoria's smirk faltered, her confidence cracking. Claire's chest heaved as she pointed at Victoria, her hands trembling. You weren't just his mistress. You weren't just his tormentor. You've been hiding something far darker, and I know because I found the letters. The word letters struck the air like a drumbeat, and Victoria's face drained of color for the first time that day. She opened her mouth to retort, but Claire pressed on, her voice rising. You weren't content with stealing a husband, with tormenting his daughter. You needed more. You wanted control, and you got it by threatening to expose something about yourself, something even he was too afraid to tell anyone. A murmur spread through the guests, the tension thickening into a palpable storm. I felt my pulse quicken, my heart slamming against my ribs. What could Claire possibly mean? Victoria's mask cracked then, her eyes narrowing, her lips curling in a snarl. Careful, Claire, she spat, her voice low and trembling with restrained rage. You don't know what you're meddling with. But the warning only fueled the fire, and Claire stepped closer, her face fierce. Oh, I know enough. Enough to destroy the facade you've built. Enough to finally free Natalie from your grip. She turned to me, her expression softening, almost apologetic. Natalie, the truth is, Victoria didn't just worm her way into your father's life. She used him. And the leverage she held wasn't only his affair. It was something about you. My breath caught, and a chill swept through me. About me? The room seemed to tilt, every sound dulling into a distant hum. Whatever she was about to say would change everything. The air in the church grew heavy, suffocating, as all eyes turned to Claire. Her trembling hands clutched the clutch purse at her side, her knuckles white, but her voice carried with a conviction that shook the silence. I found them tucked away in an old box, she began, her tone sharp yet fragile. Letters written by Victoria, hidden inside drawers at my aunt's house, the one we thought was untouched since she passed. Gasps rippled through the guests, and I felt my heart clawing against my chest, desperate to break free. Letters that prove Victoria wasn't just blackmailing your father. She wasn't just cruel. She had been orchestrating this torment for years, and the reason she held over him wasn't just his infidelity. It was you, Natalie. The word you echoed like thunder, and I froze where I stood, my world beginning to spin. I could see the color draining from Victoria's face, her lips pressed into a thin line as if silence alone could contain the flood threatening to escape. My father stood motionless, paralyzed, his eyes flickering between Claire and me as though silently begging her to stop. But Claire's resolve was ironclad, her gaze locked on me with a fire of desperate urgency. Natalie, she said softly now, her words slower, more deliberate. You've always wondered why she hated you so much, why her cruelty felt more personal than simple disdain. It's because Victoria knew something that you didn't, something your father never had the courage to tell you. The truth is, she is your biological mother. A collective gasp swept across the church, and I felt the ground shatter beneath me. My body went cold, my vision blurred, and the weight of that revelation crushed me like an avalanche. My mouth opened, but no sound came. The word mother felt foreign, like a dagger digging into my chest. No, I finally croaked, shaking my head violently. No, that's impossible. My mother, my real mother, she died when I was a child. I remember her. I remember her smile. My voice cracked, and I felt tears burning my eyes. But Claire shook her head gently, stepping closer, her hand reaching out as if to steady me. Natalie, the woman you called your mother, your father's first wife, she raised you as her own. She loved you fiercely, but she wasn't the one who gave birth to you. She knew the truth, and she chose to embrace you anyway. But Victoria, she carried you, and then she gave you up to your father and his wife, determined to erase her role from your life. Her words fell like shards of glass, cutting through the thin veil of the life I thought I knew. I staggered back, clutching Ethan's arm for support, my mind a hurricane of disbelief. Victoria, my mother, the woman who mocked me, belittled me, sabotaged every step of my life, she was the one who had brought me into this world. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat as I stared at her face, searching for answers in the twisted smile that now looked more like a grimace. Why? I demanded hoarsely, my voice breaking under the weight of betrayal. Why would you hate me if I was your child? The question cracked in the air like a whip, and Victoria's mask slipped further, her carefully constructed image crumbling before everyone's eyes. For the first time, she looked cornered, like a predator suddenly turned prey. Victoria's lips trembled before she forced out a bitter laugh, though it sounded hollow, fractured. "You think I wanted you?" she spat, venom dripping from every syllable. "You were a mistake, a consequence of choices I never should have made. When I handed you over to him and his wife, I thought I was rid of you forever. But then your father, he made me stay close, always reminding me of what I gave up. And every time I saw you, Natalie, I saw the life I could never have. You were everything I wasn't. Loved, cherished, protected, and I hated you for it." Her confession was poison, spilling into every corner of the room, infecting every heart that listened. I stood frozen, each word embedding itself into my skin like thorns. Gasps filled the room, and whispers surged like a storm tide. Some guests shook their heads in disbelief. Others stared at Victoria with open disgust. My father collapsed back into the pew, his face buried in shame, while Father Gabriel raised a hand for silence, his expression stern but shaken. "Victoria," he said firmly, his voice trembling with both authority and sorrow, "what you've done here is not just cruelty. It is sin dressed as pride. You brought your own daughter into the world, abandoned her, then sought to destroy her to soothe your own emptiness. This is beyond malice. It is destruction." His voice trembled as though he, too, struggled to process the enormity of what had been revealed. Ethan's arm tightened protectively around me, his lips close to my ear. "Don't let her words define you," he whispered fiercely. "You are not her hate." But inside, I was crumbling. Every memory I had of my childhood, every bedtime story, every gentle embrace from the woman I believed was my mother, was now tainted by this revelation. Was I a lie? A replacement? A discarded secret carried like a burden? The room spun as I tried to piece myself together, but the puzzle no longer made sense. Victoria stared at me, her expression a grotesque mixture of triumph and bitterness, as if revealing the truth was her final, victorious blow. Yet in her eyes I saw something else too, fear, because now the world knew, and her control was slipping. "I told you," Claire said firmly, stepping between us like a shield. "Natalie, you were loved. You were chosen. Don't ever let her convince you otherwise. The woman you called mother fought for you until her last breath. That's who deserves your tears, not her." The guests erupted into arguments, some rising to leave, others demanding explanations. The ceremony completely derailed, but all I could focus on was the hollow pit growing in my chest, the silence of my father, the venom of Victoria, and the ghost of the woman who raised me. My wedding day had become the battlefield of my identity, and I no longer knew who I was. The truth had finally been dragged into the light, but instead of freeing me, it shackled me to questions I wasn't ready to face. I met Victoria's gaze one last time, and in her eyes, I saw the same thing I felt within myself, an abyss. And I knew in that instant that this story wasn't just about love or betrayal anymore. It was about survival, and the fight had only just begun. The church no longer felt like a sacred place. It was a cage where the air grew heavy with judgment and whispers. I could feel dozens of eyes piercing through me, dissecting every reaction, every tremor in my hands, every crack in my breath. Ethan tried to anchor me with his steady presence, but I was drifting, untethered, drowning in questions that clawed at my soul. My heart pounded painfully, not from love or joy, but from the monstrous truth that had been unleashed in front of everyone. Claire's words echoed endlessly. "She is your biological mother." That phrase ripped through every memory I had, tearing apart the fragile fabric of who I believed myself to be. I stumbled backward, until my back pressed against the cold wall, desperate for something solid, something real. I wanted answers, not from Claire, not from Victoria, but from my father. He sat hunched in the pew, head buried in his hands, his once powerful figure shrunken into something pitiful. Rage bubbled in my chest as I staggered toward him, each step fueled by betrayal. "You knew," I whispered, my voice trembling like brittle glass. He didn't move, and silence stretched like a wound. "You knew, and you let me live a lie. You let me believe I was hers, and all the while you sat back and watched Victoria tear me apart piece by piece." The venom in my words startled even me, but it wasn't enough to pierce his silence. Finally, he lifted his face, and the shame etched in his eyes told me everything. "I wanted to protect you," he murmured brokenly. "I thought the truth would destroy you. His excuse ignited the fire in me into an inferno. Destroy me? Do you see me now, Father? Do you see what hiding the truth has done? Victoria's laughter rang out, sharp and jagged, cutting through the tension like a blade. Pathetic, she hissed, rising to her feet with a defiance that defied the crumbling mask she once wore. Always the coward, aren't you? Hiding behind secrets, pretending you could shield her from reality. Look at her now, shattered, lost, because of you. Her words slithered through the air, poisoning everything they touched. For a fleeting moment, she looked victorious again, basking in the destruction she had caused. But the disgust on the guests' faces, the murmurs of condemnation, told another story. She wasn't the victor. She was the villain, exposed in her own cruelty. And though she tried to stand tall, I could see the cracks widening in her composure. She had revealed too much, and the truth was devouring her as much as it devoured me. Claire stepped forward again, her voice calm but commanding, as though she alone could hold the chaos at bay. Enough, she said, her tone slicing through the room like a bell toll. This is Natalie's day. You've stolen her peace, her joy, her innocence, but you will not steal the love that surrounds her now. She turned to me, her eyes soft but unwavering. Natalie, don't let her lies define you. Blood may bind, but it does not determine worth. The woman who raised you, who loved you unconditionally, that was your mother. This woman? She gestured sharply toward Victoria. She chose bitterness. That is her legacy, not yours. Claire's words wrapped around me like a lifeline, but my chest still felt like it was caving in, struggling to distinguish between the truth I had lived and the truth I had been denied. The guests began to shift uncomfortably, their patience fraying, as though the ceremony itself had transformed into a trial. Father Gabriel cleared his throat, his expression grave. Perhaps it is time we restore order, he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. But I shook my head, my body trembling, my voice low but filled with fire. No, there is no restoring order until I understand why, until I hear it from her. My gaze locked on Victoria, my so-called mother, and for the first time, I didn't see her as a tormentor, but as the source of everything that had poisoned my life. Tell me, I demanded, my voice shaking but resolute. Why did you give me away? Why hate me if you made that choice? The church fell silent, every ear waiting for her response, every soul waiting for the last piece of the puzzle. Victoria's face hardened, her eyes narrowing into something both defiant and hollow. Because you ruined everything, she said coldly, the words slicing into me like a blade. I gave you up so I could be free, so I could live without the chains of motherhood dragging me down. But you never left, Natalie. You were everywhere. In his eyes, in his affection, in the way he looked at you like you were a blessing and I was nothing. You stole the life I wanted. That's why I hated you. Not because of what you are, but because of what you represent. My failure. Her confession left the church in stunned silence. I felt the final piece of my heart break, but in that moment, amid the ashes of everything I thought I knew, I realized something vital. Her hatred was not a reflection of me. It was a reflection of her emptiness. The room was electric with tension, the air thick with judgment and disbelief. Victoria stood rigid, her chest rising and falling rapidly, as she tried to maintain the veneer of control that had failed her so completely. Guests whispered, some shaking their heads in disgust, others craning their necks to witness the fallout of her lies. I felt a rush of clarity, a sudden fire igniting in my chest. I was done trembling, done waiting for someone else to decide the narrative of my life. With Ethan at my side, and Claire's support anchoring me, I finally felt the weight lift from my shoulders, replaced by a fierce resolve that had been dormant for far too long. Victoria's venom no longer had a grip on me. The chains she had tried to wrap around my identity were snapping one by one, and the sound was intoxicating. I took a deliberate step forward, my heels clicking against the polished marble like a drumbeat announcing a new era. Every eye in the church turned toward me, and I felt the gravity of the moment, the culmination of years of torment, lies, and half-truths. Victoria's eyes narrowed, the smirk twisting into something closer to panic as she realized the control she had wielded was slipping. You think you can stand there and lecture me, she hissed, her voice trembling. You know nothing of what it took to survive, but I did know. I had survived. Every sleepless night, every moment of self-doubt, every tear shed in secret, it all brought me here. My voice rang out, steady and unshakable, carrying across the room. I know enough. I know that you have wasted your life trying to control everyone around you, and I refuse to let you control me any longer." Victoria staggered slightly, as if the weight of my words physically pushed her back. I saw the first cracks in her armor, the glimmer of fear behind the cold facade. Guests began to murmur in agreement, some nodding at me, others shaking their heads at her audacity. My father's face, still a mask of regret, finally met mine, and I felt no compassion, only clarity. His choices had hurt me, but they didn't define me. My strength wasn't rooted in his love or approval. It was mine alone. Victoria's grip on my past had been a poison, but now I reclaimed my present. With deliberate precision, I lifted my chin, my gaze piercing, and I spoke with authority that startled even myself. "You are not my mother. You never were. And from this moment forward, your attempts to harm me will end here." Her face twisted in fury, and she raised her hand, shaking as though to strike. The priest's voice cut through, commanding and sharp. "Victoria, this ends now. You will leave, or you will be removed." She hesitated, the color draining from her cheeks, as she realized that for the first time, she faced consequences beyond the family she had manipulated. Ethan squeezed my hand, grounding me as I watched the woman who had haunted my life crumble under the weight of her own malice. Claire stepped forward, holding the letters like a shield, a symbol of truth and proof that no lie could withstand the light. "Natalie," she whispered, "it's your time." And with that, I felt a wave of empowerment crash over me, a validation that all my pain had not been in vain. Victoria turned to the congregation, her voice rising in a desperate wail. "You think you've won. This isn't the end. You have no idea what I can do, what I've done." But the room no longer feared her. The whispers had turned to murmurs of indignation, the nods of support for me now louder than any gasp of shock. Her influence, the carefully constructed illusions, were dissolving in the harsh light of truth. My father, finally facing his failures, attempted to step forward, but I held up a hand, halting him gently. "No, Father," I said, my voice calm but firm. "This is not about forgiveness today. This is about claiming my life, my joy, my future. The past is what it is. And now, I choose what comes next." Taking a deep breath, I turned to Ethan, who smiled with quiet pride, his eyes glistening with tears. Together, we stepped toward the altar, and I felt the eyes of the guests on us, not in judgment, but in admiration. We were not just exchanging vows. We were asserting our truth, our resilience, and our love over the chaos that had threatened to destroy it. Victoria's voice had lost its sting. Her threats were empty. And as Father Gabriel guided us to the moment of union, I realized that the power to define my life had always been in my hands. Not hers, not my father's, not even fate's. Mine alone. The ceremony that had begun in fear and deception now transformed into one of triumph, a testament to the endurance of love and the invincibility of truth. By the time I slid the ring onto Ethan's finger, Victoria slumped in her seat, defeated and silent. The guests erupted into applause, some crying, some smiling in relief, and I felt a release so profound that it almost brought me to my knees. I looked at her one last time, not with hatred, but with recognition of her failure. She had tried to define my story, to poison my world, and yet here I stood, whole and unbroken. The wedding had become a stage for the ultimate vindication, not just of my love with Ethan, but of my right to claim my life, my joy, and my identity. As Father Gabriel pronounced us husband and wife, the weight of years of manipulation lifted, leaving me light, free, and unshakably strong. The aftermath of the ceremony was surreal, as if the world itself had shifted under my feet. Guests whispered in clusters, still processing the storm that had erupted and subsided in a matter of hours. Victoria had retreated to a corner, her once commanding presence reduced to a fragile figure, her fury replaced by the unmistakable emptiness of defeat. I watched her with an odd mixture of pity and finality. This chapter of my life, tainted by her manipulation and cruelty, was over. My father sat quietly, head bowed, weighed down by his guilt, yet I no longer sought his approval or forgiveness. I had reclaimed my power. I had confronted the lies and emerged whole. Every stolen year, every hidden truth, every pang of betrayal had culminated in this moment of absolute clarity. Ethan held my hand as we stepped out of the church, the sun spilling over the stone steps like a baptismal glow. Each breath I drew felt fuller, freer, as though the air itself celebrated my survival and triumph. People smiled, some still glancing back at the scene behind us, and yet there was no shadow darkening our joy. I realized in that instant that my life could no longer be dictated by fear or deceit. The years of silence, manipulation, and uncertainty had been heavy, but they had forged resilience, courage, and clarity within me. I was no longer the daughter haunted by shadows of lies. I was a woman claiming her future with every heartbeat, with every step toward a life she fully deserved. Victoria's departure was inevitable. The woman who had tried to steal everything from me, my happiness, my identity, my wedding, was now powerless. The letters that Claire had presented, and the truth revealed in front of witnesses, ensured that no manipulation could regain foothold. I felt no triumph in her ruin, only relief. Relief that my story, my truth, had been acknowledged. Relief that I could step into the rest of my life unburdened by deceit. I turned back once to look at her, standing by herself in the shadows, and saw the hollow figure she had become. She had fought for control for years, but control without love, without integrity, always collapses under the weight of truth. And now, finally, I could breathe. The guests gradually dispersed, leaving behind warmth, congratulations, and words of admiration. My father approached me hesitantly, and I allowed him a small nod, a recognition of the man he had been and the mistakes he had made, but I no longer needed him to define my worth. Claire squeezed my hand in quiet solidarity, her support unwavering, and Ethan, ever my anchor, smiled and whispered, "This is just the beginning, Natalie. Nothing can touch you now." I leaned into him, letting the joy wash over me, feeling the freedom of finally being untethered from the lies that had ensnared my past. Every tear shed, every moment of anguish, had led me to this moment of unshakable peace and clarity. We were free, together, and nothing could steal this future from us. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden hue over the wedding hall, I felt an incredible sense of closure. The storm of betrayal and deceit had passed, leaving in its wake a life reclaimed. I knew Victoria's shadows might linger, whispers of the past might echo, but they held no power over me anymore. I had faced the woman who tried to define my worth through malice, and emerged triumphant. I had confronted my father's silence and understood the human frailty behind it. And I had claimed my life, my wedding, and my joy, unshakably. The future was mine, bright and unburdened, a testament to survival, resilience, and the power of truth. Every challenge that had threatened me now seemed like a stepping stone toward the life I had always deserved. And now, to everyone listening to my story, if you felt the weight of lies, betrayal, or manipulation in your own life, remember this: the truth has power, your voice has power, your life is yours to reclaim. Don't let anyone else define your worth or dictate your future. Stand tall, speak boldly, and face every storm with the knowledge that your resilience is stronger than any deceit. If my story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own inner strength, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and join a community where stories like mine remind us all that even after darkness, there is light, and even after betrayal, there is hope. Don't just watch, engage, share, and let your own story of triumph be heard.